Thanks, Carla, for letting me share with y'all tonight. That we do have Zoom and we can do that rather when we can't meet in person. So it's been a great technology to help us continue our Master Garden educational programs across the state. Tonight I want to talk about small fruit production. I don't know how many of you have some type of fruit trees in your yard or on your property, but there's some challenges that come about in growing fruit. It's a little bit different than growing vegetables or annuals or perennial flowers, and that the first year impacts the performance of the planting from here on out. What you do the first year is going to have a direct impact on how successful you are in producing fruit in your yard or in your orchard. It may be several years before you even can harvest anything, depending upon the type of fruit that you have in your orchard or in your yard. Also, depending upon the rootstock that it may be grafted to, or the cultural practices that you follow in growing the fruit. Fruit buds are formed during the summer of the previous year. So early growth in plant and crop in the spring are directly related to the health of the plant as it entered dormancy the previous fall. So it is very important that we get our fertility right before we start, and also to make sure that we have our fertility right going in late summer and fall, because it directly affects our fruit production and the type of fruit quality that we have. With fruit production, there's something to be done every month of the year. And care, you can't just think, well, I planted it, I set the tree out, and there's nothing else to do. That's not the case when we're growing small fruit. Small fruit can be incorporated in our landscapes in a lot of different ways, from the standpoint of even a shade tree with some of the nut trees or standard fruit trees. I don't recommend that pecans be used as shade because of the aphid excretion of pecan trees, which gets on your cars and your lawn furniture. I grew up in a home where we had pecan trees all over our yard. So you never could have a shiny car if you were going out on a date, because it always was sap and mildew that grew in the sap on the cars, or if you got ready to sit down, a lot of times we would have a sticky seat on your lawn furniture. So I don't recommend pecan trees as being a shade tree where you might park or have your patio, but they can be used as shade trees. We can use the fruit trees also as screens, depending on the dwarf trees, or maybe a grape arbor, or blueberries, or even your caneberries can be used as a screen, maybe between property or lines or something that way. It can block a view. Also, arbors can be made out of muscadine grapes or your other grape. So there are ways that we can incorporate fruit into our landscape, as well as just an orchard in itself. Ground covers from strawberries, borders along the property. We use raised beds a lot of times for our strawberries, especially our blueberries. They do much better on raised beds than they do just growing in our lawn itself, and also the caneberries. So keep in mind, you may say, well, I don't have any room in my yard to have an orchard or on my property, but you can incorporate small fruits into other ways in your landscape. Excuse me. So the next thing you got to decide, okay, what do I want to plant as far as fruit? So there's several things you need to think about before you plant some. Okay, am I a person who likes to be out there spraying something to keep disease down or fight insects all the time? Or am I more of a carefree gardener who wants to plant something and not have to worry about spraying and maintenance and to have good quality fruit? So we kind of look at this chart just a little bit to kind of analyze what it's going to take to produce good quality fruit. What is the easy fruit that we can plant that doesn't require a lot of spraying? So kind of look at different fruits. Okay, say apple. Apple is a tree that you can plant. Usually we like to have two different varieties as a pollinator. but it's not that hard for it to grow, and does require some pruning and a little bit of spraying throughout the year to have quality. So that's one we might think in terms of maybe pear trees or grapes going to require some more spraying than maybe we want to do. Blackberries is something that can give you a turnaround, or your caneberries really quick as far as some type of fruit, because we can get fruit off the second year from planting. And in the third year, we're pretty much getting into major production harvest of them. Blueberries is one we can plant Larabidae or the northern high bush. And blueberries are very easily established if we get our soil pH correct. They are one of the fruit trees that does need to have an acid soil around pH of 4.8 to 5.2. If you remember your soils class, which is a very acid soil compared to our regular gardening, which we like about 6 to 6.2 on all of the other fruits. So yes, we could plant these type of fruits, maybe peaches, nectarines, plums. They're going to require a lot more spraying to have quality fruit, especially the peaches. It's very difficult to produce peaches in our area without doing spraying and pruning and maintenance. So if you're not a high maintenance type person, then maybe you might not want to try to grow peaches as far as your small fruits. The cherries don't do really well in West Tennessee. And grapes, there's one that we require some maintenance because of black rot in cherries. And I'm not sure, maybe Montgomery County may be getting a little bit farther north for muscadines to do very well. They will grow in my county because I'm right on the Mississippi line. So we're about 100 or so miles south of you, so we can grow muscadines here. Ones that we may not want to think about in planting would be like apricots, plumcot, figs, and olives. Figs may grow in your area. They usually will get frozen back. They're in some type of protective, maybe on the southern part of a wall or something, you might be okay. So kind of look at this as far as analyzing what small fruits can I be successful with without having to put in a lot of spraying every 7 days to have quality fruit production. A lot of us think of terms of small fruits and we think of what we see in the Kroger display or the grocery store display aisle and the fruits, and we just are not going to be able to produce that quality perfection of fruit unless we're doing some type of spraying and a lot of maintenance. There's always something that can be done with small fruits 12 months out of the year. Kind of look at this as far as the calendar of what needs to be done. If you have small fruits like peaches and apples and those type of fruit trees, in January, February, you need to be doing a dormant oil spray. Now, dormant oil is exactly what the word means, dormant. You have no leaves at all on the tree, and we use a oil spray. And what that does, it kills any of the insects that maybe the eggs are there or scale that are on the wood or in the bark. And what you're trying to do is eliminate the population that may come out as far as insects that can do damage to your trees. We'll be doing pruning to our fruit trees in late January and February. March, we're still doing some pruning on your fruit trees. Apples, we can prune when they're very dormant in January, February. We don't want to do any early pruning on grapes in January, because what you're doing, you're cutting that cane, and we normally have most of our cold weather in January and February. So you're opening up a wound for that cold to go down into that vine, and you can get into some killing of your grapes that way. We also don't prune our peaches quite that early in January because Many times we can have a late freeze in spring, and we don't want to go in there and prune too heavily in January and cut off a lot of our bud potential. And then we have a really late frost or killing frost, and we've already pruned out so much of our bud potential that we won't have much of a crop in peaches. We're going to do some partial fertilizing in April and May. In April, usually March and April. May, hopefully you're doing some thinning. Remember, if you've got peaches or apples, we want one fruit about every 5 inches apart. We don't want clusters of apples or peaches where there's 3 or 4 at one bloom cluster. One reason, because it will cause overfruiting and can break our trees down. And the second reason is we will not have large fruit. So we want to thin those out during that month where we will have larger fruit and there's better air circulation around the fruit, so we can have less disease problems also with the fruit. In June, we're doing pest control. We're spraying in May and June for if you're raising peaches, you're trying to control brown rot and funguses that do affect the fruit itself. Hopefully in July, you're harvesting some of your fruit. If you're growing grapes, we want to be spraying for black rot before it even, as soon as the grapes have stopped blooming, because that's when it's infected, that next 4 weeks from time it's bloomed. In August and September, we're going to want to be fertilizing our peach trees with their second application. And we'll talk about fertilizing blueberries a little bit more in detail on that. But in August and September, your buds are developing on the trees for next year's fruit crop. So it is important that we fertilize, and we found that out through research, the peach trees in August and September to feed those buds that are developing for next year's crop. You want a soil test in October, so if you do need to adjust your pH, you'll have time for that chemistry to change in the soil. And then, it's always a cleanup. If you have mummified fruit still hanging on the tree, or limbs that are, or fruit that is fallen on the ground, you want to clear that out from under the tree so that you'll not have a source of disease spores on your tree. So there's always something to be done, not every day of the week, but something to be done sometime during that month of every month of the year. Also, we need to think about what type of site we have in either in our yard or on our property. We maybe want to develop an orchard. And you may not always have that type of environment for fruit trees to do well. Fruit trees all like full sun. When we say full sun, they need at least 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours of sunshine a day. They don't have to have total full sun, but they do better. And the sun is what develops those sugars in that fruit. So it's very important that we allow sun getting into those fruit. And that's why we're doing pruning, because if you don't prune your apples and your peaches, you're not going to get that light into those fruit as they develop and grow to give you the good sweet sugars in your fruit. So full sun is one of the things. If you've got a heavily shaded yard, you're not going to be able to grow fruit trees because you don't have enough sun for that fruit to develop and do well. Soil pH 6 to 6.5. Exception, as I said a while ago, is your blueberries, and you want a 4.8 to 5.2 pH for the blueberries. We like a well-drained soil, and we like to have about 30 to 36 inches of rooting depth if possible. You may not have that in all areas, but we do want to have a deep rooted area for our fruit trees. If you're setting out apple trees or peaches, you want to make sure that you pull a soil test deeper than just the 6 inches before you initially set out the orchard, and because you're going to be fertilizing down into that 18 to 30 inch soil level. when you initially set out your fruit trees, because you can't get that phosphorus excuse me, down into the soil once you've set out the trees, because you're not going to be deep plowing. And you want an available water source. Okay, what size plant should we look for when we're purchasing? In apple trees, if it's a standard or semi-dwarf, anywhere from 4 to 6 foot unbranched whip. I know most of you probably may not go and order from a nursery that is selling you the rootstock and the whips. And most of you may go to a garden center or to a box store, and you see these trees are 7, 8 feet tall. You think, oh, it's going to produce fruit. Unfortunately, many times those trees, apples and peaches that are 7, 8 feet tall have never been pruned properly, and you have a lot of branching that you're not going to start out with a good stock as far as the development and the pruning. If you're buying a peach tree, you want something that's about 30 to 36 inches as far as a whip or tall, so that you can prune that out and get that started correctly. If you look to the first photograph, figure 1, that is what your apple trees should look like. Now, all your fruit trees are grafted onto a rootstock. And apple trees, depending upon what type of rootstock is grafted, can be a dwarf tree that'll get about 12 feet tall, or semi-dwarf, which gets 12 to 16, 18 feet tall, or it can be a standard tree, which will get 20 or 30 feet tall. So depending upon your space, you may want to buy a certain type of rootstock where it will receive, say, a dwarf or semi-dwarf. As far as a fruit tree, we really don't want a standard, because we don't want to develop a tree that you got to have ladders and harvest the fruit as far as your apples and that type. So if you bought a tree, figure 2 shows what it looks like before, and then it's been pruned back out to thin it out and allow that light to get in as far as the opening of the canopy of the tree. Figure 3 is the pruning system that you want to use on a peach, which you use in that open canopy type, and you're wanting to get anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 branching around from that top of that. Blueberries, your 2 to 3 year old plants is what you're wanting to buy. I wouldn't recommend buying like a 6-inch bare root. You can order from nurseries that way, but they're hard to get established and just takes longer for them to grow and produce. So usually we buy like a 1 gallon or 2 or 3 gallon blueberry at a nursery. Your grapes, you're buying about a 1-year-old vine, and your caneberry is a 3 to 4 foot root section for a small plant itself. So that's kind of your plant purchases that you can do. Always keep in mind, the best time to plant your fruit trees would be late winter to late spring. You can plant them if they've grown in nursery cans any time of year, but if you're buying bare root, this is the time of year, late winter to late spring. Keep in mind the size of the hole. They should be planted at a depth that's the same as they were growing in the nursery, where that graft union is 2 to 4 inches above the soil level, okay? Width, you want to have a large enough to accommodate the root system. You don't want to bend those roots and wrap them around in the hole. And really all the root pruning you want to do is very minimal if you've got a broken root on the root stock itself, or any dead or damaged roots. Now we don't amend the soil. I recommend that being done. You fill the soil hole back with the parent soil that you just dug out of the hole. And the reason being, years ago we used to say, well, mix peat moss and plant it back into the soil. Most of the time we're planting into a clay soil. And what happens if you add a lot of organic matter back into that hole, what you're doing is creating a pot that's going to hold water, and you don't want to do that. You want the roots to get established in the parent soil that in your orchard or in your yard. Now, there are different fruit trees require different type or have different type of pollination. Those are self-pollination. That means they transfer pollen from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or a flower of the same species. We have self-fruitful, does not mean cross-pollination. Those are like your blackberries and your currant or your peaches. They are self-fruitful. Those that are cross-pollination, it has to have transfer anther to the stigma of the flower of a different variety, but of the same species. And that's like your apple trees or even your blueberries. They're self-unfruitful, but cross-pollination is necessary for those to do well. So when you're planting apples, yes, you can get apples off of one apple tree, but you get more fruit if you have two different varieties of apples. And same thing with the blueberries and your other fruit. Partially self-fruitful, you get some cross-pollination, but it improves the yield and quality if you have two different varieties of that same fruit. Okay, when to harvest? Some people think, well, I know when it's ripe and when it's not ripe. Well, some fruit will ripen more after the harvest, that being an apple, apricots, pears, peaches, and plums. They will all ripen more. Many times you may buy peaches at a fruit stand. Yeah, they have the color, they look good, but they're really very hard. But you give it a couple more days, they will really ripen more. And the same thing on apples also. Or you may buy them and they're already ripened at the peak time. But keep in mind that those fruits will ripen even after they've been picked or harvested. What will not ripen after it's been harvested is blueberries, cherries, grapes, strawberries, and your nuts. They are all, if you harvest them at the peak time, will have very sweet, good sugars. If you harvest them premature, they're going to be a little bit more sour and not have the sweetness that you'd like to have in the fruit, because it's not going to ripen any more than it is the day that you pick it on this particular fruit. If anybody has any questions, just stop or you put in the chat, and we'll stop a little bit later on, but just stop me during presentation. If you have a question, we'll try to answer those while we go along. So some of the tips you might want to keep in mind when you're harvesting, whether you're going to pick your own or you have them in your own yard, you want to make sure that you do not allow the fruit to get overripe. You don't want to ever pick the fruit while it's wet, and that the cells will break down more. You have more of a rot problem with the fruit. You also want to be gentle. You don't want to pick an apple and throw it in a basket or a container. Try to keep them bruising. You always want to pick into a clean container. If you've been picking brambles or blueberries, make sure you wash out that container. If it's a metal container that you're picking in, and it is clean before you go to pick, harvest some more. You don't want to drop fruit. If you're picking fruit up off the ground, I would not want to mix it with fruit that I picked from the tree, because usually when it falls on the ground, it's either bruised or may pick up some bacteria or some problems. And if something's bruised and damaged and you don't want to mix it with your good fruit that way. You want to minimize the time between harvest and storage or usage. And you also want to cool the fruit as soon as possible. the longer the fruit keeps that heat in it, especially blueberries and blackberries, the quicker it's going to deteriorate and the shorter the shelf life is going to be on those individual fruits. We like to have high humidity in our refrigeration if we're storing it. So those are some of the tips and things that pretty much is just general across the board for any of our small fruits, whether it be apples, peaches, blueberries, pears, or brambles. All those factors pretty much will be affected on each of those type fruit. Now we'll look at specifics on certain types of fruit. Kind of give you an overview, just a little bit about blueberries. Blueberries, we don't want them to bloom and develop fruit the first year. So you're not going to be harvesting anything until about the third year. Usually you get into the growth and development about the 6th to 8th year, you're getting the full crop production. Excuse me. Now the first year, you're going to pull the blooms off of it. The second year, you're going to pull the blooms off of it. What we want that blueberry to be doing that first and second year is producing a good root system and growing you a plant so that it will produce blueberries in a greater potential in the following years. It's a lot of stress on a very young plant that's in a 1 gallon container to have a couple blueberries on it to grow and develop on that. I know it's hard to go and pull the berries because a lot of times as consumers, we look at, oh, well, that's already got blueberries, it's already got an apple or something on it. So that's the one I want to get. But blueberries, you don't want to let it produce fruit. Now, that being said, if you're a nursery or a box store and it is a 1 gallon container, then that's probably the second year of that blueberry plant. If it's in a 3 gallon container, then it's probably already been growing 3 years and it might have fruit. So you may not pull every bloom off of that. So that kind of gives you maybe a little bit of a reference point to understand. So many of us think in terms we want blueberries, and when do we start thinking we want blueberries? In the nursery in the spring, and then we buy them impulse wise, but we have not tested our soil to know what the pH might be. I know I had a spot there at the farm that I thought, well, I'll plant some blueberries there next year because I had brought in some new varieties. And I tested it and it was already 6.8. Well, there goes that. Because I can't lower the pH from 6.8 down to 5.2 in 1 year's time. So the year before you go into establish blueberries, you want to pull that soil sample and see where your pH is. Because remember, that's told you the first year of decision making and setting out fruit will determine success for future years of that production. So prior to the first year, you're going to set them out. You're going to pull that soil sample for blueberries. First year and the second year, you're going to pull the blooms off of it. You're not going to let it develop fruit. And then the third year, you will get some fruit from the blueberry bush. This kind of just backs up what I said. You want that pH 4.5 to 5.3 on a rabbit eye. High bush can be slightly lower. The high bush varieties are grown in more of our northern areas than the rabbit eye. But think of blueberries like you would azaleas. They're like a high organic, rich area. They also like an acid soil. The rabbit eye a little bit more forgiving if you don't have an ideal situation, probably that way, than the high bush is. But they prefer coarse, well-drained soils, not our heavy clay. Don't plant them in a low area where it doesn't drain well. because they don't do good. What we found in research that the blueberries really do better on a raised bed or in a raised bed situation. We researched areas where we were using like a fine crushed bark like the nursery stock would grow in, and we're doing that as a raised bed, but you've got to have good drainage, you've got to have good source of water when you do that. But they are a very shallow rooted system. They're a fibrous mat, but blueberries don't have any root hairs on the roots. 60% of the roots are in the top foot of the soil, 8 to 12 inches from the crown. So it is a very shallow rooted plant structure-wise. But make sure you do have irrigation availability for those blueberries, because they do like a lot of moisture, but they like a well-drained situation. Now, there are basically two types that we grow in this area, and the third type of you will find the southern high bush. There are a different species between the three different types. Your rabbit eye is your tallest, it's long-lived, it's the latest to ripen. It's a little bit more tolerant of heat and drought. Most of the rabbit eyes were developed for Georgia and Florida and the southern part of the United States. And the northern high bush, they require a little higher chill hour requirements, most cold tolerant. There are more disease issues, but they also come in earlier than the rabbit eye do in our area as far as ripening standpoint. There's some southern high bush varieties out there. They haven't been tested a lot in Tennessee. We're doing some more work with it, but you want to choose blueberries of a higher chill area. So we'll talk a little bit about what a chilling hour is so that you understand the terminology that I'm using. A chilling hour is the number of hours between 32 and 45 degrees that the plant receives. Now, those buds have gone from growing in the fall. This is all of our fruit production that we're talking about chilling hours. Those buds developed in the fall. They've gone in dormancy from response from the short days as well as the cooler temperatures. But the chilling hours is calculated the number of hours between 32 and 45 degrees. When it's down to 20 doesn't mean it's making more chilling hours, but it's a time between 32 and 45. So we're looking for blueberries that have a higher chilling hours in Tennessee, anywhere from 800 to 1200 hours. The southern high bush can take between 500 to 550 chilling hours. So what happens, the reason we want more chilling hours is that keeps that plant in dormancy longer. If a tree or like the peaches reach a chilling hour quickly, say if it's 500 like California peaches trees are, we can reach that in Tennessee if we have a cool fall. We can accumulate those hours up, and then all of a sudden February the 1st we have that warm spell and the plant's already reached the chilling hours, and the plant thinks, oh, it's fixing to be spring, we've already met the chilling hours, so let's start growing and producing flower buds. And that's how we get into a lot of our fruits getting killed out from those late frosts. Carl, I can't see the chat, so if there's anything comes up, pressure, you'll have to handle that for me. More soil, the rabbit eye, more soil adaptable. Like I said, while ago, take a little bit more heat and drought tolerant. Longer lived, the larger plants, later fruiting in the high bush. We have several different rabbit eye cultivars. There's been a lot of research being done with the blueberries, a lot of work comes out of Georgia, some out of North Carolina. Tip blue is one of the older varieties that was kind of our standard, was one of the first rabbit eye that was developed. It was developed because of its flavor and its performance as far as production. Premier is another one that's large berries, has good flavor, somewhat pH tolerant, Brightwell, lower chill, but blooms with higher. Powder blues, lighter fruit, that came out of the North Carolina's work. And then Climax is a lower chill. It has a good flavor to it. Those are probably the varieties that you can find at your box stores and at your nurseries too. Those are probably the 5 main ones that you still see being sold in the marketplace. Some of the newer ones that you're not so easily found in heck, maybe a mail order or maybe some of your especially nurseries. It's Ocalocony. It's a late season berry with good yields. Titan is bringing on a lot of promise. It has the largest rabbit eye fruit. Early with good color and flavor. Vernon is a new variety, also a very vigorous plant. Good yields, late flower, early fruiting. You want to grow it with Premier. And Columbus is another large fruit. And what you're seeing is in the commercial, the bigger the blueberry, the less these you're filling those quarts up if you're in a commercial situation. So you want a good flavored blueberry, but you also want one that's very large that fills up the quarts and then harvesting quickly. Now, remember I said you like to have a pollinator of a different variety. So if I was planting even 2 blueberry varieties, I would probably buy 2 different, if I was planting 2 bushes of blueberries, I'd probably pick out 2 varieties. If I was planting 4, then I'd have 4 of the same type, whatever your choice, and then maybe one of a different variety, just to serve as a cross pollinator. Climax is one that's used a lot of times as a pollinator for those older varieties, in that it has good flavor and has a lower chill requirement on those. So, but those just give you some ideas of some varieties you may see. I think Premier probably is one of the older varieties that I think is probably one of the better as far as large berries and really a good flavor to it. Northern high bush, they're picky about their site. They prefer even moisture irrigations and must on those. Have a little bit of disease issue, but they do have larger and early fruit, maybe not as long lived as the rabbit eye. High yield and risk, less risk of blossom loss from blooms. But they usually do better in higher elevation, which you may find in Montgomery County, they would do probably a little better than would in, say, Hardeman County. We see them listed if you get a lot of these northern variety catalog. We'll see the varieties of the high bush Duke being one that is always listed. That we see Blue Ray is another one that is a good variety. I've had a grower here that's used Duke in his blueberry planting in his home in the orchard there. They just don't, there's a big fruit and large good flavor, but just don't produce the number of blueberries. And these are some of the southern high bush that we're seeing. Legacy is one that I've seen is grown in Tennessee for several years, very successful. Ozark Blue coming out of the University of Arkansas with higher chill hours, so maybe well suited for our Tennessee climate. Reveille is another one I've seen in the marketplace. But Legacy and Ozark Blue are the 2 that I usually see in the market in around in our area in Jackson. Blueberry and types in the fruit. Flavor will let you decide which is a better berry. High bush typically are larger. As you see in the palm of the hand there, the one on the left is probably the high bush, where the one on the right is probably premier or rabbit eye type. Skin texture and seediness. We used to say that the blueberry was our organic fruit until something called spotted wing Drosophila came into effect. And we're seeing a little bit more of that effect coming into our blueberries, where commercial growers are having to do some spraying. We haven't had too much problem in Hardeman County. I don't know if you have it there, Carla, with it. Homeowners usually not spraying, but in a commercial situation, we do see them doing a little bit of spraying just as a preventative. Because once a spotted wing Drosophila is discovered in your blueberries, it's almost too late because you're going to lose a lot of quality with those. Some of the pros and cons of the high bush, pro being their earlier fruit, usually larger. Fruit made early enough to avoid some of the pest issues. Drosophila usually comes in later in the summer, but they are short-lived and more disease-prone and more sensitive to the site you have situation there. Rabbit eye, they're more tolerant of parasites and moisture management. They're longer lived, they're less disease risk. Later fruiting may increase pest incidence if it's harvesting later in July. Larger plant has potential for more management needs as far as pruning. And of course, the later it is produces fruit, then it's going to be hotter in July than it is in June. So as we talk about blueberries, we want to plan before planting. That year of zero is critical before you ever set out a blueberry. So you don't want to cut corners, you don't want to just set it out. We may need to add some organic matter. What we don't want to do, we don't want to use manures or compost that raise pH, such as leaves, pine needles would help potentially lower, but oak leaves and those things are going to raise your pH. And you want to buy from reputable nurseries and don't compromise on the variety as far as the cost of the variety. So the year before you're planting, you want to just kill out any weeds or grass that may be growing in the potential area, lower that pH. You might want to plant a cover crop just to kind of suppress the weeds. If you're on growing plants, and usually we'll see the blueberries in our nursery starting late February, March, and April. You don't find your nurseries getting in blueberries this time of year just because it's not a lot of sales that's occurring. However, fall and winter is great if you can find them in our area. If you didn't have a good soil site, what I would recommend would be doing a raised bed and using irrigation on that. This is what happens to blueberries. We're all impulsive buyers as consumers, and we buy the blueberry. Don't check our pH, don't check our organic matter, don't do anything. So we set it out. And this is what you start to get about the second and third year. If you've planted in an area that does not have the proper pH, you start seeing chlorotic leaves develop in blueberry plants. It becomes less thrifty that third and fourth year. If you go back and remember your soils class where you had the chart where it showed your pH and all the different microelements far as their availability. Blueberry is heavy user of iron. Okay, where is iron most available when we pull out, look at our soil availability of nutrients? It's most available when we have a low pH around 5. And this is what will happen with your blueberries. Now we can lower the pH by adding sulfur to the soil and amending it, and that will lower the pH. If you're setting out more than 1 or 2 blueberry bushes and you're doing rows, then you want to put them about 5 feet apart, 5 to 6 on rabbit eye, and about 10 feet between rows is a good average. You want to make sure that your hole is large enough that you can spread those roots out, not cram them all in the hole where they can't spread out. Plant same level as it was growing in the nursery, and want to water in well immediately after you're planting. You can fertilize individual plants very efficiently on 5-phosphorus and potassium, unless the soil indicates that. We want to use caution. We don't want to fertilize immediately when we plant it. Give it time to get established. They're very salt sensitive as far as the blueberries, so we don't want to come back in there with ammonium nitrate because you're going to have more salt build up in the soil. And if you have drier situation, that salt sensitivity is going to become more of a problem with the blueberries. And you may get in some browning of the tips with the salt buildup if you're not irrigating. So this chart just gives you a little bit of a management on a small scale. I'll leave it up just for a little bit. I'm not going to read it. One of it lets you look at it as far as how much to fertilize. The first year, you may not even need to fertilize. In the second year, you can see as the buds begin to develop and flush out, apply about 1 to 2 ounces of a 4-8 acid-loving fertilizer. There again, you can use like a Azalea or Camellia fertilizer if you just have 1 or 2 plants. This is more recommended as far as like the rabbit eye varieties. I would use sulfur or ammonium sulfate to lower your pH. Of course, aluminum sulfate will also lower the pH, but I don't like to use the aluminum because it is a very immobile element, and you can build up aluminum toxicity in your soil if you continue to use aluminum sulfate every year. So I'd rather use just sulfur or ammonium sulfate as far as my acidifying fertilizer. Like the blueberries can be partially or fully self-fertile, but we get more production with benefit from cross-pollination. We get more pollination done from our bumblebees, the buzzing of the flower when our bloom time kind of overlap. Now, bumblebees sonicate for the vibration of their wings. You notice the blueberry bloom is kind of upside down. It's not a bloom that is easily pollinated by the honeybees. So bumblebees are better pollinated than actually than the honeybees are on the blueberries. Talk a little bit about the management the first year and pruning. You can do pruning at planting, especially if you have some very tall growth. The picture to the left kind of gives you an example of how you want to prune. the blueberries. Any of our fruit, we don't like crossing over limbs, whether it be blueberries, whether it be peaches or apples. So we want to kind of remove those limbs or branches that are crossing over. Remember, we said light is one of the most important things in fruit production. So what we're trying to do is open up that light into that center of the plant. And the tip shoots, like number 2, that are so close to the ground, we want to remove those out from the standpoint. You're not going to get much fruit production from branches down there because you're going to get shading of the canopy of the plant. If the plant happens to be pot bound, make sure that you rough up those roots so they'll start to grow and spread out. Okay. This gives you a shot of what an older, maybe 5-year-old blueberry bush would look like. The vegetative buds, you say, well, if you tell me to remove the flowering buds, what does a flowering bud look like? They're always going to be the very fat buds on the stem, and your vegetative buds are going to be very narrow and very short. So that's how you distinguish between the flowering buds and the vegetative buds on the branches. So you notice you've got a very fibrous root system. Then you've got the crown. Then you have the larger canes that's growing up. Then they branch off into, and then from there to the shoot. And then your buds are going to be on the tip of the blueberries. So that kind of gives you a visual picture of what the dormant one looks like. And we do our pruning, always remove the weak or shaded lower branches. Prune plants back to 4 to 5 feet in height and width. If you let a rabbit eye continue to grow, it can get 10 to 12 feet tall. So you don't want to be out there on a blueberry on a ladder trying to pick blueberries. It's usually about on the 5th year that we really in high bush, and you're going to remove about 20% of the canes on the high bush each year after about the 5th year. Rabbit eye varieties is about 6 years, and we're going to remove about 10 to 15% of the canes per year. And what we're trying to do is generate new wood, letting in more light to increase your production. This just gives you a little bit of a close-up picture of what the blueberry buds. The larger ones are your found at the top of 2 or 3 inches of the shoots. Fruit buds are found on previous year's growth. Leaf buds are smaller, more pointed, and found on the lower portions of the shoot. So we talked earlier, that 3rd year, we want to let it go into production and get blueberries off of it. So remember what I was talking about as far as the size of pot and plant that you're buying. If you're buying a 3-gallon container, then you don't wait 3 more years before you get blueberries off. Now your buds, you can prune them or just very easily rub them off with your hand if you're in that 1st and 2nd year. And I would, as soon as you see it bloom that 1st and 2nd year, remove those blooms. Don't let it go all the way to fruit. With fruit trees, pruning is always a training process for any type of fruit. In blueberries, you're trying to renew the old wood, maintain strong production. Generally 10 to 20%, like the earlier slide said. It's usually done toward the end of the dormant season, not in the fall, and pruning to push new growth out. So you do it when the blueberries are dormant And another reason you do that is so that you can see the stem structure better when it's growing. If it's got leaves on it, you can't really see the branching and structure and where you need to actually do the pruning. So how fast and how upright the plants grow is impacted by how you prune it. What you're trying to develop is a narrow base. Remove the crossover. Those what you're going to prune out are the small twiggy lower shoots. Any crossover angles, canes. You can remove about 1 to 3 older canes, and you're going to head back. That's your basic principle pruning out the blueberries. So this just gives you another picture of the pruning, which you kind of see that you had a larger, older shrub on the left side, and you're going to take about 10 to 15% of old canes out each year. And you're going to tip it back where it doesn't just continue to get taller and taller and taller to keep it where you can easily pick the blueberries. This just gives you another shot of the management. You may say, well, I'm just removing so many of the limbs off of it. I'm reducing the amount of blueberries that I'm going to be able to harvest. You're really not. What you're developing is a potential for growing bigger blueberries and much sweeter blueberries because you're letting in that light into that inner part of this blueberry bush and opening up that canopy where these buds will develop in the larger blueberries themselves. There again, where it shows one on your picture, you're not going to get any blueberries off of those little branches that's close to the ground. It's yielding you really any kind of production on those blueberries. And 3, what you're getting is a very fast growing juvenile shoot that's going to continue to get taller, and you want to cut that back so it'll start to branch out and produce more blueberries for you in the future. This just kind of gives you a little bit about your timing of your fertilizer. We usually do fertilizing for our blueberries 3 times a year. Okay, the first application is when the bud breaks. Okay, then we'll split the second application about the 6 weeks after the buds have broken, and then the third application is 12 weeks after the buds have broken. So that throws it back to about late June, July, and August is when we're actually doing that last fertility on our blueberries. And that's to feed those buds that are developing for next year's crop. Now, as far as the timing of the harvest, we're going to do it in the early morning when it's cool. The blueberries are very turgid, full of moisture and juices at that time. You want a uniform blue color and kind of have a whitish, waxy appearance. Now, a blueberry can be blue several days prior to it even being white. So just because the blueberry is blue, don't think they're ready to harvest. You want that blueberry when you touch it, if you're having to really pull on it and that stem stays on the blueberry, you're harvesting too early and you're not getting the most sugars and best flavor of the blueberries. About every 5 to 7 days, once the blueberries start coming in, of course, the temperature is going to have an effect on how then soon it gets ripe from one harvesting to the next. You don't want to harvest when it's raining. You want to separate any poles and pick what's good. As your blueberries can be stored at 33 to 35 degrees, high humidity in your refrigerator if you're going to eat them fresh. Can be stored up to 1 to 3 weeks. Now, blueberries are one fruit that we don't wash it before we freeze it. If you harvest it in our fruit, blackberries, brambles, anything, we want to get that heat out of that crop just as soon. So don't go pick blueberries and set it on your car hood and then go talk to your neighbor for an hour after you pick it, because you're going to lose quality. Once the blueberries are, like I said, will have turned blue, they'll stay on there for about a week before, and you want it to become a more of a whitish dull blue when they're harvested. Blueberries don't really have a lot of disease that causes a problem. One can be Phomopsis. It's a twig blight, and you may see some dying out on the blueberry bushes. But there's not really a lot of disease as far as the plant itself. We can have some leaf spot, which really doesn't cause that much damage to the trees or bush for dying out or killing it. But for mosses, you can get some die out in blueberries. You don't want to leave any kind of mummied blueberries under the bush. Burn out in the story in the dead twigs or branches. The publication from UT PB 1622 will give you recommendations as far as any type of fungicides. It is our disease and insect control publication that gives you recommendations for all the different types of fruits that we grow in Tennessee. Carl, you want to go a little bit longer or you want to take a break? Okay. We'll go and cover some of the caneberries. And we'll take about a 10 to 15 minute break here after we cover those. Okay, your caneberries do not require a low pH. They can take 6 to 6.5. They do like a well-drained soil. They do like an east facing for good rapid leaf drying. That our fruit, if we plant on a north exposure, they will stay dormant longer. On southern exposure, they're drier and warmer, and there's more opportunities for spring fall scatters. Now, rubus is the genus of the caneberry. So if you're out in a rural area, there may be wild blackberries or caneberries growing on ditch banks. So we'd like to not have any of those around this 100, 200 yard. Reason being that many times the wild berries will have a rust disease, or they can have multi-bloom. We have some diseases in those. The caneberries become more and more popular in our grocery stores and consumers. Consumption seems to be increasing every year. You will get a crop the second year from the time you've set them out, and usually full crop about the third year. Lifespan is about 6 to 8 years. If you've had them planted that long, you probably need to start with some new canes for future production. There again, we've talked a little bit about chilling hours. I wouldn't want to plant anything for low chilling hours. Blackberries do much better in this area than the raspberries. Raspberries are great fruit, but they like more of the mountainous or more of the Middle Tennessee climate than we have in West Tennessee. However, in Montgomery County, you may be able to grow some raspberries. In Hardeman County, we just are not very successful with raspberries, and we usually do better from Middle Tennessee on up in East Tennessee. Now, in the cane berries, we have a 4 cane bearing types, and we have primocane bearing types. What is referred to as a primocane is the first year of the cane's life. Okay, the cane grows from the rootstock, elongates, and they have some lateral branching, some bud initiation in late summer. The upper portion flowering in late summer and fall, and fruiting zone tends to die back after fruiting. Now the 4 cane is the second year of the cane life. That's where you have the bud break. You have laterals that develop, blooms and tips. And you have fruiting, and the 4 cane itself dies out. This is the most common type of blackberry in the black and purple raspberry. So you have the primocane the first year it grows, develops a stalk and some lateral branching. And the second year we call it the 4 cane, and that's when it actually produces the fruit. Now, some of primocane bearing may produce fruit the first year on the primocane. And the second year, you may have some flowering at the lower portion of the stem in early summer. Cane dies back completely after fruiting. We may just grow up with a primocane crop and then cut it all the way back down in the ground. So we'll talk a little bit about the 2 varieties. Okay, this image shows you the primocane and the 4 cane, where the primocane fruiting plant will bear fruit on the tips the first year. If it's left for the second year, it will be fruit on the lower part of the branch. Okay, first year it's primocane up here in the lower part. But the botanical breakdown of you have your crown where your branches will come out. Now, many times we can get suckers off of these rooting tips. You can propagate, divide, just cut that off at that point and share if your neighbor have a new transplant, or we can pull that cane down to the ground where it may touch, it may root, or you can bury that stem to produce more plants. Using the spacing between our rows will be anywhere from 10 to 12 feet between rows, because you won't have room to be able to drive a lawnmower or a gator or something between it or something to harvest. We plant our cane about 2 to 4 feet within the row. If they're erect canes, if semi-erect canes, use about 4 to 8 feet within the row. And then big hole large enough to spread the roots out, cover 2 to 3 inches and form it up, and then water well. For his plant management, the cane berries will grow in clay soils. We can use black plastic or some type of woven fabric that will help keep down the weeds along the rows where they're grown in research. They'll use like a landscape fabric, cut a hole in it, plant the berry, and that keeps down the weed. Blackberries can be sensitive if you're using Roundup as a weed control among your cane berries, so you want to be careful about getting any kind of drift from that spray on your caneberries. They need about 1 inch of water per year. If they're using the flasiculture, they'll use some type of drip tape to provide their water source. And this is what you see in production. So this is your primocane, the vegetative growth that comes out in 1 year in the floricane types. That does not produce any fruit. So then the second year, this cane becomes the floricane, and that's where you get your blooms and blossoms on your blackberries or your caneberries. So I had one person that I was visiting the farm said, you know, I had berries the second year, but I never had any more berries. And what he was doing, he didn't like these vegetative primocanes coming out, and he was cutting them off every year. So then he had no fruiting wood the next year because he cut all the growth off of his primocane. The blackberries grow well in temperatures in the mid-80s. Ripening time is usually June and July, and they will produce a lot of fruit. And we have thorn varieties, and we have thornless varieties of the blackberries. And most of these are floricane, excuse me, bearers. We do have some newer primocane varieties bearing types, but they haven't been trialed a lot in Tennessee. They've been developed in Arkansas, but we haven't trialed them a lot in Tennessee. And I'll talk about some of those blackberries that are floricane produce fruiting type. Kiowa is probably the most popular of the thorn cultivars. It's erect, it's a mid-season, has a long harvest time, there's very large fruit on it. The fruit are born such that they're not hard to harvest. You may think of thorns, and when we were picking wild blackberries, there were thorns, and there's a thicket type of production, and it was hard to pick the thorn because you're always getting stuck. But with these thorny cultivars that we're growing in production, they're not that hard to pick. The Kiowa is the earliest one that's used most. Chickasaw is another. Now, a lot of the thornless varieties will have Indian names like Natchez, Akachita, Navajo, all varieties that you see in the marketplace that are very available every year from your mass producers or nurseries. Triple Crown is one that is a similar semi-erect cane. It's a little late sweet season, has good yields, and but has a lower storage potential. Now, your caneberries are, I've talked about getting the heat out of the fruit just as soon as you pick it. It's one that is very sensitive to leaving it out in the heat and not getting that heat, getting the chilling done. A number of years ago, I was an extension agent training program in North Carolina, and we visited one of the big blackberry operations. They had about 20 acres of blackberries, and the fruit within 15 minutes after it was picked was in a cooler. And the next morning, they were sitting on shelves in New Jersey and New York. So it is very important that those berries and get cooled down. These are some of the varieties that you see. Just give you a little bit of information as far as the variety, flavor. and the size of it. Give you time to just kind of look at that. The University of Arkansas has done more research than any probably university in North Carolina is doing a lot right now. And as you see the stair step, that's kind of the timeline. Natchez is the earliest maturing, Osage, Arcachita, the Navajo, Apache. As far as the ripening time on those particular berries. Ponca is one that is a new variety. They've been have trial plantings at Columbia at the research station. It is a thorns variety, and Dr. Lockwood said it's given a lot of potential. And it's a little earlier harvest near Natchez, very similar to Natchez as far as the bloom and harvest time. So that might be a variety that you look for in the marketplace. We feel like it's got a lot of good promise. Godot is another one that is being researched a lot in our experiment station. So those might be two varieties that you want to look at. Ponca has a lower acidity to the particular fruit itself. So we talked about primocane type that actually produces fruit on the primocane that first year. And two of the new original varieties, Prime Jim and Prime Jane, came out a number of years ago. Prime Arc 45 is a thorny, large berries, very good for shipping. Primark Freedom and Primark Traveler are good for shipping. Flavor is not quite there as they are in the 4 cane types. The caneberries are one of our fruits that doesn't require a lot of fertility. They're not as high on nitrogen user. Use about half the fertility they're like a strawberry. Fertility recommendations tailored for blackberries as rather than the raspberries. So this kind of gives you just a little bit of fertility management application. I just kind of looked at it. If you have caneberries, you might want to write that down. The second year, your applications when the primocane emerge and the plants bloom. And that gives you kind of a little small scale if you have in a home garden, how much fertility you would use per 100 foot of row. So we're talking about in the second year, 2.5 pounds. Let's say a 1010, you want to use a balanced fertility in 100 foot of row. I'm going to show you just a little bit of a trellis overview. We trellis because one is the ease of harvest and support the canes. It also increases the sunlight and air movement and the effectiveness of spray. It's much easier to manage if they've been trellis. There's different type of trellis systems. The T-trellis system can be used, as you see over to the right. There are 2 wires that holds this up, and we're going to prune those back to where we've got main leaders, and then we kind of tie them over through the cane trellis wire. You get better light in there. This is kind of how your cane structure is built. It's a little narrower in that first branch of wire, and then you're going to pull this out so that you can get sunlight down into that cane. This kind of is a different type. It's just the V shape where they've used T-posts and run wires. And this is more of a V shape. It lets the cane go out to the wire. A little bit of just a pruning overview. The reason we do prune increases yield quality. It opens up that canopy and reduces pest pressure. On the blackberries, train the first year, the canes by tying them to the top wire. Even the red types may be trailing in the first year rather than growing upright. In subsequent years, the canes in grow of 12 to 18 inches, except for your first year canes from 8 to 12 above the wire support lateral growth. Remove those floor canes. Remember, the floor cane dies after fruiting, so you want to cut those out as soon as fruiting is over. It's a lot easier to tip it and pinching off the primer canes to stop that growth from getting too tall than it is to flip it for pruners. This is your primer cane you've tipped, and then this is your floor cane that is produced its berries, and then this is going to die out. You're going to remove it. This just kind of gives you some pruning diagrams. It kind of shows you the tipping out. This is your early spring. You're going to tip it back in summer. You're going to get these lateral branches. It's going to produce your fruit on it. In the wintertime, you're going to come back in here, cut all this back out, and remove the deadheads, remove the floor canes, and then you have the bloom and fruit in the next spring. Primer cane, you're going to get fruiting on the tip of the primer cane during the summer and later in the fall. If you leave that primer cane, it will produce the fruit the second year on the lower portion. Most of the producers don't let it go into that second year and try and get some fruit off of the second or the lower part of the stem, and because it just doesn't produce as much. So what you see in the primer cane fruiting type, like Prime Jim and Prime Jane, allow the primer canes to grow fruit, and then they'll cut them all the way back down to the ground. And then this will grow up another primer cane and fruit, and they cut it back down to the ground. This just kind of emphasizes again, harvest when it's cool, don't harvest when it's wet, and get it in cool refrigeration, get the heat out of that fruit. You usually have to pick at least 2 times a week or every other day on your primer canes and your cane berries. Just a little bit of the management part for us maintaining weeds and Watch for rust, maybe developing on leaves. There again, PB 1622, PB fungicide. Raspberries, I won't spend a lot of time with those. They like our cooler summers. Handle much the same way. If it's the red, you see the Titan. I see Jewel listed in most of our box stores being sold as far as a black summer producing one. Carol Reese said that she had found this one online. It is grown in Texas. I have not been able to find it in nurseries, but she says this particular raspberry variety has produced, she's had production off of her plant in her house here in Henderson County. So not be one you might potentially look for online if you really like raspberries and see how it does for you. Heritage is another one that I see many times and seems to have done okay if it does any of them. I found raspberries might get one crop of them, and our heat just gets to the plant and they don't produce the next few years. All right, why don't we take maybe a 10 or 15-minute break? If anyone has any questions, I can't see the chat box, Carla. So if there's something out there in the chat box, if you would.
No, thank you, Lee. We'll take about a 10-minute break.
Okay, we'll come back at 7 and start again. Talk about some strawberries.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Lee, I'd say we're probably ready to get started again if you want to.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Strawberries is one of the fruits that we've had for years and years. As far as home gardeners, many of you may have grown up in a farm setting or something that way, and you had your own strawberry plants. One thing about living in this time period, we have fruits 365 days a year. That was not the case before we had refrigeration and the modernization that we have now. And we used to do a lot more canning and preserving and those type things to be able to have fruits. So I'll give you just a little overview for strawberries. They're ripening time, they're a short day, May and June. We now have ever-bearing types where they are day neutral, meaning that it does not affect the ripening, whether it's short days or long days. They will flower and fruit in the spring as well as middle of summer or even the late summer crops. So the All-Star and the other varieties were a short day, meaning that they flowered and began to fruit as the days, while the days were still short. We'll see our first crop about 8 to 12 months on the short day varieties, can be less on other varieties. The strawberries like a well-drained soil, pH 6, 6.5, one that is usually rich in organic matter. If it's heavy soil, we'll see a little bit more disease issues. We want to plant them where we've not had strawberries before because of the disease issues of the anthracnose and fungus that gets on the leaves, and sensitivity to the high salt. They are herbaceous perennial plant. They have a compressed stem, crown. They produce runners or stolons from when the days are 10 hours or more and the temperature is 70 degrees. They do receive some pollination from wind, but bees are needed to really get good pollination. This actual fruit has hundreds of seeds on the swollen receptacle. And it's a very shallow root system, and we're 6 to 12 inches as far as the depth of the root system. The June bearing or the short day type, they fruit in late spring. They have vegetative growth in the summer, and the set flowers in the days are less than 14 hours in the fall. The evergreen or your long day variety types, and like I said, they can produce spring, late summer, or early fall. What I see, most of those varieties don't have a lot of fruit production at any one time, not compared to this early short day or the June bearing varieties. And we also have day neutral. The day length has no control effect on the fruiting of those strawberries. They will produce the first year. The berries are either smaller, and the hot temperatures can disrupt the growth of those day neutral. Varieties that we've had in the marketplace a long time on the short day cultivar is your early grow, All-Star, Cardinal, and Jewel. Probably those are the ones you see mainly in the marketplace. There's a list of some other varieties that are available, but early grow and All-Star and Cardinal are the varieties that we have traditionally seen. So the short day cultivar, Sweet Charlie is very early. It's a soft berry, it has really good flavor. Chandler is a larger fruit, good flavor, and Camarosa is your late season cultivar. some of the work that's being done in North Carolina, those are two varieties that you're seeing haven't been released. If I double, no, I didn't, but I had flipped through two slides at the time. If you're looking for ever-bearing cultivars, Ozark Beauty is one that I see in the marketplace sometimes. We do have a strawberry producer here in my county, and as far as a day neutral, they have plant Albion, which is a medium large, has a good flavor. Needs more nitrogen. Actually, I was at the farm today. They planted them in a hoop house, and they were beginning to get a few strawberry blooms off of those plants, and actually had some berries that were producing. So it is a day neutral. The length of the day does not control the timing of the flower itself. Attributed to milder flavors, a little smaller berry. And we're seeing those being introduced. He's looking at producing strawberries in early in January and February. He has them growing in a hoop house. So he's hoping to get some berry production earlier than we traditionally would think of having strawberries in this part of the country. Site selection, so again, full sun, soil quality, we want good drainage. We have the matted row is what is usually used a lot of times in our homes, in that we don't have equipment or try to do plastic filter. Now the matted row, the first year you're planting, and you'll expect maybe 3 to 4 years out of that planting. The planting used in the spring for full harvest the next year before you're actually going to get berries off of. If you can find or you can order the plants and plant them in the fall, you'll get more production that first year out of it. 25 plants can get 40 pounds of fruit in 1 year, but that's usually that second year when you have more production. Like I said a while ago, the short day varieties that we usually see are Early Glow, Jewel, Cardinal, and All-Star that you'll find in the marketplace. And I know Carla gave you a reference of where you can order some plants on the strawberries, and that's what I would probably do, because I wouldn't want to pay what I see charged in the box stores for one plant. We can order a bunch of 25 or more for a lot less than that. Weed control is critical. So if you know you're going to plant strawberries there next year, I try to burn down that area and till my soil up in several months in advance, and try to keep grass and get it under control for planting strawberries. You don't want to follow vegetables such as tomatoes, anything in the nightshade or something might have a fusarium wilt problem. Prepare the soil as soon as you have moisture and temperature allows you to. Most of the time we will broadcast our fertility before planting on that. So if you're doing a matted row type of production, you want to have your rows about 3 to 4 feet apart, and you're going to plant your strawberries about 8 to 24 inches apart. And the reason being so that they put out these runners, like you see in the bottom circle picture. And those will peg down and become your production plants also. Now, it's very important you plant strawberries at the proper height in relation to the crown and soil, because it's going to have a direct bearing on your productivity of your strawberry plants themselves. You notice in the picture, we want that crown right and root system right at the soil level. The next one, you're planting it too deep, it's going to stunt the plant. The third one is going to be too shallow. What's going to happen is it dries out, that crown's going to dry out. If it's above the soil line, you're going to lose some plants. And then that fourth one is just poor root placement, where you just crammed it in the hole, you didn't have a big enough hole, and those roots are compacted together. So the first year during the establishment, of course, you want your soil fertility and pH and soil tests. Usually in like 100-foot row, we're going to plant fertilize with about a half a pound of ammonium nitrate or 1.5 pounds of triple 10 per 100 square feet of row space. Now, most all the publications say remove blooms in the first year. I don't know many people who go out there and actually bend over in the fall and pull all the blooms off of the strawberries. Sometimes you can have runners that just kind of go too wild. You may need to trim back into the, or turn them back into your main row. Maintain weed control, prime mulch in mid to late winter on those. And we use the wheat straw a lot of times to protect the flower on those. Drip irrigation can be used considering single season. Tool overhead irrigation we usually use for frost protection. Not too much of that's been, I think the nursery up at Milan, they use some overhead, but it can lead to anthracnose and some root rot and even fruit mold. Can become an issue if it stays too wet and the beds have a lot of organic matter that's rotting or decaying. So this kind of just gives you a chart as to what to expect and what to do in your matted row system. So it's going to be that first spring, you're going to get a harvest, and then you'll renovate, and you'll come back and fertilize and that. Okay. Now, how many times you have to renovate depends upon the health of the plant and how strong or mat those runners may have pegged down. You may have to do it once, or you may have to renovate twice in pre-picking season. And what you're doing is running a plow through the row. I don't think there's a picture there, but it wasn't. One of the problems we have with the matting system, we're getting anthracnose on the leaves, and usually after harvesting the matting system, we'll run like a bush hog or lawnmower, raise the blades up, flip those leaves off. That removes a lot of our dead leaves, and then the new leaves come out and won't have the disease problem with that. The other way that we're seeing strawberries produced on a commercial basis in our area now is what we call the plasticulture system, where the strawberries are planted on these rows of plastic, 12 inches apart, 2 rows per 3.5 or 4 foot row of plastic. There's drip irrigation underneath the plastic, so they're watered. This production you see here on the left. But you do need to have some type of drip irrigation under that plastic. Otherwise, the plants will not get enough water. They're just now getting through planting in our area. The strawberries were planted in the last week or so. As I said, we'll only go 2 rows and 12 inch apart on top of the beds. Varieties that are used are Chandler, Sweet Charlie, and Camarosa are the 3 that I see mainly used in our area. North Carolina's done some breeding on some newer varieties, but still Chandler and Camarosa and Sweet Charlie are the 2. They produce a big berry like what we get off in the grocery stores in California and Florida. Consumer has kind of demanded that they have a big berry because they're used to seeing a big strawberry other times of the year coming in from California and Florida. But they don't have the flavor that the home liking strawberries do. Sweet Charlie is a little bit smaller, but it has a very sweet, really good flavor through the berry. In the plasticulture, they'll bloom earlier than the matted row, and that plastic has warmed that soil up in the spring, and they'll start growing root system quicker than the matted system. But sometimes we have to watch a little bit closer because the plant is further along as far as the blooming development, and we can get in a late freeze or frost and lose part of the crop. So most of our producers either keep row covers, some use irrigation, but row covers probably what you use more. And that is just a very thin fabric that can give the grower about, depending upon the row cover you select, you can get anywhere from 6 to 12, 15 degree variance from the air temperature to under the cover that is used to protect the plant. So most years, plants are destroyed after they harvested. Some growers might care a second, but most of them are destroying the plants. And what our producers doing is using the plasticulture to grow strawberries. After the strawberries are gone, he'll burn it all the way down, kill all the plants, and then come back and plant pumpkins into the same row and grow his pumpkin pots. That way he's utilizing the plastic. So he's splitting the cost of the plastic and the row cover, not the row cover, plastic and irrigation between 2 different crops. Another way you can start strawberries in your yard is doing something similar to this. You're doing like a strawberry pyramid, or you could do them in raised beds. This just kind of gives you an idea how you grow strawberries. It could become a very ornamental decorative planting in your yard or your landscape. Keep in mind your June berries are going to produce in late April, May, into June. Everbearing, you're going to get less fruit at any one time on your everbearing. And your day neutral, you get a little bit more production on that. There are strawberry varieties that have been developed now, growing in hanging baskets. Some have red flowers and white flowers. I've never seen them produce what I see the photographs shown in home and lawn home magazines and things. We have grown them in our greenhouse production wise, but I never get the fruit off of them that I see listed in photographs and seed catalogs and some horticulture magazines. There again, the PV 1622 does give you some cultural information as far as fungicides. We have more problem when we have a rainy season in the springtime on our strawberries getting brown rot and more disease with those. One thing to look for could be thrip or spider mites. A number of years ago, we had someone had a strawberry field. It was right next to a wheat crop. And when they harvested the wheat, all the thrips and spider mites that was in the wheat went to the strawberry patch. So it caused a lot of insect and disease damage from that. So weed control is very important in either system that you use. Strawberries are ripened in 30 days after bloom. Again, pick in the morning when the fruit is dry. Cool them down as quickly as possible. One thing you can wash strawberries in apple cider vinegar, and I don't remember, you can Google that maybe. My wife has done it, and I think, and she was told that it would keep your strawberries 7 to 10 days in the refrigerator, and that does work. But I don't remember meant to ask for this morning the portion. That might be something to research and work on that. But that does, what it does is washes all the bacteria off the strawberries, and their keeping quality is much longer in the refrigerator. I don't know how many of you may have grapes. We'll talk a little bit about grapes. We won't spend a long time on grapes, but it is something that we can grow in our area. This gives you some of the bunch varieties, the seeded and the seedless. I'll let you read the varieties that we can grow in this part of the country. The wine industry has grown greatly in Tennessee. I think we have some vineyards up there, Carl. I think in your neck of the woods in there, Montgomery County or close by in neighboring counties. And we are seeing an increase in production of bunch grapes. Muscadines, these are some varieties that are available in the marketplace. I'm not sure how, well, it's too cold up there because y'all are several degrees colder than we are in Hardeman County. So maybe a little bit further north, and muscadines might not do as well. Okay. This is one disease, if you're a master gardener, you should be able to know to recognize. This is black rot in grapes. And I know I get a lot of calls, and I'm sure Carla does too. We get them when they see this on the right-hand picture. It is way too late to do the spraying. The left picture is the same disease, but it's expressed on the foliage. And you should start spraying right after the grapes bloom. And it's about 6 weeks in there that you have to do spraying to keep this under control. If you see the black rot on white, then it's too late. Spraying's not going to do any good. This kind of gives you a diagram of training the grapevines. Remove all shoots except one. It's time of planting. You want to develop one main vine for as a stock to make your cane on the grapevine in the future. If you go by a new vineyard, you may see like shells around that grapevine. And sometimes with a newly planted and there's not much foliage, you can get into blistering. And that's why you see those protective covers around the vines on those. So you want to train up a main trunk. You're going to have some type of trellis. And then you want to train to where you have two canes that's going to be running down your trellis, and 2 spurs left instead of 4 spurs, okay? And this being your spurs right here. So why do we want to prune your grapevines? We want to promote growth in the desired areas. We want to keep the close to the trunk or codones, so it's not going all the way out the tip of the cane. We want to develop the wood for future crops. We'll remove any of the dead or broken or diseased canes that's on your grapevines, and remove the unfruitful canes in the pruning process. We also want to adjust the crop size. Sometimes you can have so many grapes that the plant itself cannot produce, and protect the fruit. Now we'll prune back those spurs to where you have 2, no more than 4 buds coming off of that spur. So from that standpoint, you are going to need to prune. Remember, we talked about sunlight being the key to fruit production. That is very true also in grape production. And also, we prune to remove a lot of that foliage where we can get the spray up under the canopy and onto the fruit when we're trying to produce good quality grapes. Talk a little bit about apples. They can be grown in our area. Some of the helpful hints about those: they need at least 8 hours of sun per day. You want to plant the trees anywhere 6 to 20 feet apart, depending upon what type of root system, whether it is a dwarf tree or a semi-dwarf or standard. Remember that we do want 2 cultivars required for successful pollination. That's not to say if you have 1 apple tree that you won't have any apples on it. A lot of times we can get pollination from neighboring people's yards or some other pollen blown in, or the variety may be where it will pollinate, but you'll get less fruit. You do need to prune annually to have healthy production. Dwarf apple trees in 2 to 3 years, they may produce some type of fruit. You may get 1 or 2 apples off of it. The trees take about 8 years on the other 8 to 12. Now, if you order in a rootstock, a bare root tree from one of the mail order catalogs, this is what you should get. Here is your graft union, and the graft is done onto a rootstock. The rootstock are actually coming off of rooted material, and the top's cut out of it, and then they graft this union from the type of fruit that you want, whether it's a red or yellow or what type of variety. And the sign is what is called the top of the tree that is grafted to a rootstock. So it's the scion wood is harvested in the dormant stage from a variety that you want to have as your fruit production. Right? This gives you a little bit of spacing as far as the type of rootstock that is the trees are planted on. Just a good rule of thumb: provide as much horizontal space as you anticipate the height of the tree. So, these are pretty much general pruning guidelines, whether you have fruit trees or whether you have ornamental trees. And that is, always remove the diseased branches first. Any branch that may be broken, or any dead branches out. And the reason we want to do those first is that opens up the tree where you can see more of the branching structure. Those automatically need to be pruned out. So you get those out of the way where visually you can see better branching. Now on apple trees, we want to remove any downward growing branches on the tree, where if you have a limb going out and then you have branches coming down underneath those, we want to remove those so we can let more light into the other branches and produce better fruit. If two limbs are crossing over or going back to the center of the trunk or entangled, we want to remove those. And you want to go back to its base where it's coming from. Don't just whack it off 6 inches and leave a stub. You want to go back to the main limb that that's coming off of. We want to remove any suckers that's coming out from the roots. We refer to those as being water sprouts or any vigorously vertical branches. Structure may have a limb, but you have a water sprout on that big limb, and it's just shooting up a very rapid sucker-like growth. And you want to remove that out of the branching structure. Always make your pruning cuts close to the branch collar at the base of the limb. If you've used pruners, you know that one side cuts smoother, closer to the trunk or limb than the other side. So always make your cut where you're cutting it as close to the limb itself. As I said earlier, dormant sprays are very important to use on your apples and your peaches, because it does kill the mites and the eggs and scales and aphids, the eggs of aphids, where you have less insect problems early on, and it controls diseases that on the entire tree. So you want to spray the entire tree as well as the trunk. You want to use a spreader sticker that you can buy, or you can use like a dishwashing soap, Joy or Lux, or some type of soapy solution that just makes that dormant oil go on smoother, and as well as give you good coverage when you're spraying on that. But do not apply dormant oil once the leaves are out on the tree. Otherwise, you're going to be burning the leaves on the tree and doing damage to the foliage. This is usually done in January or in February, but it is the first important spray to do on apples and peaches. So the illustration there just kind of gives you pruning to a central leader over several years of growth to kind of give you an idea how would you go about training an apple tree. Remember, this apples is different than peaches because this is framed to a single trunk is the main structure of the tree. The red dashes shows you where you eliminate the limbs and branches. Most people will under prune apple trees because they think they're cutting off too much of the wood. Remember, as I said earlier, light is very important getting into that fruit. This just kind of gives you a little bit of a, again, 8 hours of sun, a little bit of spacing, and a little bit of maintenance. Okay. We look to grow apples, and we want what we see in the grocery store. You can get that, but you're going to have to do a spray program to keep that from occurring. These are two apple diseases that you should know as master gardeners. If you have a neighbor, you have fruit. The one at the top is called sooty blotch. It has no effect on the flavor of the apple. It has no effect as far as eating the apple, but it's just a blotch that has affected the skin. It really doesn't affect the flavor of it. But it's one of those things we're doing home fruit that we'll see this type of disease that occurs on some of the apples. The second one is called Prospect disease, and I wonder how they get these names, sooty blotch and fire speck disease. Very visible on the skin of the apple, but very common diseases that we'll see in a home orchard situation. I would say try to select varieties. This is scab disease on fruit, and this is what you will see on the leaf. Choose varieties that are more resistant to scab. Cedar apple rush is one of the problems that we'll have. Fire blight. This is very common in some varieties. So when you go to select varieties, look at their resistance to certain diseases. There is no way that I can tell looking at your apple tree what variety that it is. I had a lady that called me last week and said, "Can you come out and tell me what variety of apple it is?" I said, "Ma'am, it doesn't have any, the fruit's already gone. There's no way that I could tell you whether what variety that is." So if you do set out fruit trees, write yourself a note somewhere, because you may get one that's, "This is really, really good. I wish I went and found another one," and you don't remember what variety it is. So do keep notes. But fire blight is one of the diseases that very identified with that shepherd's crook on the tip of the disease. If you're cutting fire blight out, which you should remove, go back several inches from where you see the infection on the limb and make your cut, because the disease is still down probably 5 to 6 inches down that stem. Make sure that you clean your pruners if you cut a lot of fire blight out, and then you go to cutting wood that is not infected with fire blight. You can infect your other branches, so make sure that you do clean your pruners when you do that. This is cedar apple rust. It takes both of these species for this to complete its life cycle. We will see the cedar apple rust in the springtime, the brown galls that you'll see on eastern red cedar in the spring. When these spores come out of the gall, you'll see this gelatinous orange material, very identifiable. And those spores are go airborne and infect our apple trees. Golden delicious is one of the worst ones in our part of the country for fire blight. So if I was setting out a yellow apple tree, I would not set out golden delicious because of this problem that with cedar apple rust. It doesn't kill the tree, but this much damage on a leaf is affecting the ability of that tree to feed and grow the apple itself. You will also see some of this scaling or this type of damaging growth on the skin of the apple too. So that's a disease. You want to select variety that has some resistance to this particular disease. Peaches is, we are not able to grow this crop of peach unless you're doing a lot of spraying. I talked about buying like a 30-inch switch when you're purchasing fruit trees. You need to place your order now if you're buying from the mail order catalog for next year, and they will ship them at the time they need to be shipped. So we'll plant them in February as a bare root. You'll cut it back to 24 inches in height and then train to this open center because you remove the terminal and you want this open center. As I talked to you a while ago about buying from some of the stores where they're 3 years old, big in 3-gallon containers, I'm sorry. The trees may be 6 and 7 feet tall, so they've never been pruned properly to give you this branching structure that you want to have in the peach tree. So that's why we would not want to be buying 3-gallon that's never has this type of canopy training being done. With the pruning with peach trees and apples and fruit trees, some years you'll leave a branch and then next year you come back and you'll cut that branch off. So it is a every year decision-making training process to develop the tree that you want to have 5 or 6 years down the road with those. We don't want to fertilize at planting. Maybe if you plant them in February, then sometime in March you can come back with and plow 1 pound of 10 broadcast 5 inches from the trunk of the tree out from it. Don't put it right at the trunk itself. And you might put some calcium nitrate. That's not 1 pound per tree. So you're applying a very small amount of fertilizer. One of the problems we have with peaches is a peach borer that will girdle under this skin of the peach tree. And we need to do a spray program with that, usually in June, to prevent this borer from girdling into the bark. Because a lot of people lose their peach trees because of peach tree borer, and it loosens that cadmium from the bark, and then the tree will die out from that. I mentioned pecans from the standpoint, I don't know if it's really bad up in your county, Carl and Montgomery, if people have pecan trees. But pecan phylloxera is one of the questions we get in our area about pecans. And you see the warting or the crinkling of the leaves on the pecan limbs. And that's called pecan phylloxera. It is caused from an insect that stings the leaves and the buds, causing abnormal growth tissue. The only way you can control it is about 2 sprayings before they really kind of bud out, and then 7 days later give another spray. Most homeowners don't have the spray equipment or the access to a sprayer that can saturate the tree. Malathion will control it. It does not kill the pecan tree. It just makes it look bad as far as the foliage and the branching structure. And does affect production. You don't have as much pecan yield because of the damage to the leaves. But it is one disease, as master gardeners, I feel like we should be able to identify, where someone will ask you. We get a lot of questions here about that also. Webworms, get a lot of questions about fall webworms on pecan trees. Okay, anybody have any questions? Since it's kind of hard not to have back and forth discussion with a Zoom. So we've gone a little bit faster call than we normally would in regular classroom setting. But if anybody has any questions about any particular variety or any type of fruit, I'd answer those for you.
Okay, I'm pulling up the chat box here.
Yeah, I had put a question in the chat box before the break in reference to the caneberries. I'm wondering, you said they have a lifespan of 6 to 8 years, and after that you have to start over. Do start shoots from your existing plants, or do you have to start over by buying new shoots?
So you can start from your existing plants. I mean, you can renovate, or you can pull limbs down and bury the stem and get suckers. Some varieties have a tendency to send up root suckers anyway. But no, you can start it from the existing plants. You don't have to destroy your plants and then start over, but you would need to put it in a different location than the existing caneberry area that you're growing in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next question I see is, has anyone had success with Maribel plums in Montgomery or Stewart County? I would love to find some with semi-dwarf or dwarf rootstock. I'm not familiar with that.
I didn't understand the name of the fruit.
Maribel, Mirabel plum.
Not familiar with that particular variety of plums. Plums are kind of hard to grow in this part of the country, in that usually they will bloom and get killed from a frost.
Okay.
Check the chilling hours on that variety. If it has very low chilling hours, then it may not be very successful in growing in this part of the country.
We do have a comment about that from another participant. It says Maribels are small yellow plums, a little bigger than cherries, and with a small pit, common in much of Europe.
We
I
have
don't
a
know, I just hadn't
native,
heard of them. Okay, next question. Our peach tree oozes sap from the trunk and every branch. Is it salvageable?
you're getting the waxy oozing out of the peach tree. Is that what the question is?
Yeah, oozing sap. It's probably either got a fungal canker or some type of borer. So gotta be staying on your spray schedule.
The borer will be found right at the entrance, but you'll find a hole down close to the soil area
Mhm.
below where you've got your scaffolding. Some peach trees have more of a tendency to have waxing on the bark, oozing of the sap, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a borer.
The tree is not a sapling, it's a pretty old tree. We recently moved into this house and nothing here has been taken care of in years and years. So it's a fully mature tree and it's just an oozing mess. So I guess we'll spray it and see if that'll take care of it.
I would probably prune it hard.
Yeah. But that's in what, January timeframe?
We have our first hard breed.
A little bit later. I would do it in January.
Yeah.
Maybe March.
Okay, so after a good hard freeze, we can start pruning.
Yes.
Okay. And when would we spray then?
We have a spray schedule, and actually I've posted that on the Google Drive.
Okay,
And so you all will be able to go back and reference it. It goes through, some of the, step by step, the different stages that the tree would be in, like just before bloom and while it's dormant, bloom, pink, petal fall, things like that. You've got to be pretty particular with your spray program to get
Yeah.
fruit.
yeah, I was mainly concerned about stopping this oozing and so on.
Right.
that-
Well, you have to control the diseases to get rid of the ooze. You
Yeah,
also have to correct the health of the plant and the soil. Yeah, there's a lot of things that would go into that.
yeah. I guess we got something to do in the winter.
Yeah.
The new publication has pictures in there that tells you when the shuck or pre-bloom or the bud stage. So help you in determining when to spray. If it says it's bud stage or shuck stage, so you have a photograph that shows you that stage of development.
Okay, I'll look for that then. Thank you very much. You've been very informational.
Thank you.
Next question. You talked about spraying with dormant oil and using a dish soap. How do you go about that?
If you've got a backpack sprayer, a 3-gallon, just mix the dormant oil in it. Of course, you're not going to have leaves on the tree, so you can spray. Going to try to soak all the wood on the tree, on branches, tips, trunks, everything. So you want to get a good coverage with the liquid spray.
For larger trees, would you recommend a hose end sprayer attached to your water hose so you can get up through the tree?
Make sure you're getting enough spray in your relationship of your hose and sprayer.
Right. You should be able to set the dial, put your
Right.
fungicide, whatever in there, then hook it up and set the dial to whatever the label recommendation is, and then just spray the tree using the force from the water pressure.
You just want to follow the label direction on your
Right.
spray.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. How much dish soap? Yeah. I can't say that on just a basic
But it
recipe.
doesn't take a whole lot, depending on the volume of the water that you're mixing. But you can buy a spreader sticker that will give you directions on how much of the spreader sticker to put in your spray combination.
Okay, well, I think we've covered all the questions in the chat box. So we're going to go ahead and stop recording and close the meeting for tonight. So I hope to see you all next week. I would say with my quarantine that we will most likely, yes, have next class purely virtual and no in-person meeting next Tuesday. So, okay. All right, everybody take care. Bye.
Hope everything goes well and you improve, Carla.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Thank you, Lee.
you're quite welcome.